Zoroastrianism is one of the world's most ancient religions, and for centuries was widespread in Central Asia, Persia, and along the Silk Road. Zoroastrian philosophies influenced Greek scholars such as Plato, Pythagoras, and Pliny the Elder, and was admired around the ancient world for its intellectual depth and spiritual richness. Greek scholars wrote about the priests, or magi, of Zoroastrianism with respect and expressed a deep desire to visit and study in Persia at a time when Greece was laying the foundations of Western civilization. In addition to scholars from Greece, other faiths also greatly admired the benevolence of Zoroastrian rule. The Jews, in their Babylonian exile under Cyrus the Great, were famously allowed to practice their religion and were even freed to return and rebuild the temple to Yahweh in Jerusalem. These freedoms were a rare form of religious tolerance at the time and were attributed to Cyrus the Great's Zoroastrian faith. Many of the magi were well-traveled and spread their teachings all over the ancient world. It is even believed by some that the three wise men who traveled to see Jesus when he was a child were in fact magi of Zoroastrianism. Despite its legacy of tolerance, intellectualism, and wisdom, Zoroastrianism was eventually diminished and replaced by Islam after the 7th century AD. But how did this ancient Persian faith rise from obscurity to shape the fates of multiple empires, only to disappear into the shadows of history? The origins of Zoroastrianism begin with the prophet Zarathustra, who was also known in Greek as Zoroaster. This priest was likely born in the 2nd millennium BCE in northeastern Iran. His tribe were nomadic pastoralists and have since been referred to as the Avestan people, after the name of the holy book of Zoroastrianism. The Avestans were a polytheistic society that revered gods that were similar to the Vedic Indian deities. Though born into the local religion, Zarathustra showed distaste for the multitude of gods and goddesses within his native context. When he was 30 years old, Zarathustra received a transformative revelation which would forever change Persia. He had gone down to the river to gather water for a ritual, and suddenly in a vision he saw a figure of blinding light appear. He had encountered Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of wisdom. Ahura Mazda explained to Zarathustra the truth of his own existence as the one god, the reality of good and evil, and finally instructed him to correct the local cults by proclaiming this revelation. In response, Zarathustra and his followers abandoned the polytheistic practices of their time and began to preach the vision from Ahura Mazda. They were met with resistance up until the regional king, Vishtaspa, heard the teachings of Zarathustra and was converted to Zoroastrianism. This is considered one of the earliest significant instances of monotheism, a belief that would later influence other religious traditions that followed Zoroastrianism. Zarathustra's message was essentially dualistic and maintained that the world was a battleground between Ahura Mazda and a spirit of destruction named Angra Mainyu. This war between truth and falsehood incorporated human beings as agents of either good or evil. Those who adhered to Zarathustra's teachings were responsible for making choices that would reinforce the good that existed in the world and demolish the evil. Good thoughts, good works, and good deeds were the method by which humans assisted Ahura Mazda in reinstituting the initial intention for creation. The corruption of the natural world was apparent to Zoroastrians in things like death, disease, hostile wildlife, and all which made life difficult and painful. There were pure elements also, mainly fire, which was understood as a symbolic representation of the purity of Ahura Mazda's original created order. Zarathustra's teachings gained widespread acceptance in the coming centuries and eventually became the state religion of three successive Persian empires: the Achaemenids, the Parthians, and the Sassanids. For about 1,000 years between the 7th century BC and the 7th century AD, Zoroastrianism flourished in these realms, reaching its greatest territorial and cultural influence. The Achaemenid Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great, was the first known society to make Zoroastrianism its state religion, though it also allowed other faiths to coexist. This was notably demonstrated by Cyrus's decree that allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple after their exile in Babylon. These were the same Zoroastrians that were likely referenced by Plato in his work, Republic, where he says, "It is said that Zoroaster, in his account of the soul's destiny after death, declared that it was judged by a supreme and righteous judge." This reference to Ahura Mazda as an ultimate judge is among the first instances of a final judgment which is essential to the doctrines of other monotheistic faiths. It was at this time, however, that the first major setback of Zoroastrianism came in the conquest of Alexander the Great. Alexander's invasion of Persia in the 4th century BCE and the subsequent Hellenistic influence posed significant challenges and brought religious syncretism between Hellenistic cults and Zoroastrianism. Alexander the Great was named by the Persians Alexander the Accursed, after the destruction of the ancient city of Persepolis. During this tragic incident, many of the most preeminent Zoroastrian texts and libraries were burned. Most of what was lost in the burning was never recovered. However, after the Achaemenids, the Parthians restored Persian rule in the 3rd century BC and to some extent Zoroastrianism's prominence. Parthia emerged amid the rule of one of Alexander's successors named Seleucus. The Parthians were a nomadic tribe that originally inhabited the lands near the Caspian Sea. Though they were effectively Zoroastrian, the religious tendencies of the nomadic peoples who founded the empire was much different than the former Achaemenids. Owing to the influence of Greeks after Alexander, a mixture of Iranian and Greek deities have been found on Parthian coinage. These included the fertility goddess Anahita and Mithras, the sun god, alongside Ahura Mazda. Tyche, the Greek goddess of luck and chance, was also on these insignia, and it is thought that a blend of Greek and Iranian deities were worshipped in Parthia alongside Zoroastrianism. Fire altars have also been found on coins, demonstrating the beginning of the building of enclosed fire temples under the Parthians. Although different from its previous iteration in the Achaemenid Empire, Zoroastrianism maintained a place of prominence in the court of the Parthians, with magi acting as advisors in the court of the kings. However, the Sassanid Empire was the final and greatest stronghold of Zoroastrianism. Ardashir I conquered the city of Ctesiphon and firmly defeated the Parthians in the year 224 AD. During the 400 years of Sasanian rule, Magi held significant power, and Zoroastrian teachings were incorporated at every level of society. The Sassanids also codified Zoroastrianism's sacred texts, the Avesta, and the hymns of Zarathustra, known as the Gathas. Fire became an even more prominent liturgical element, with fire temples serving as places of worship across the empire. Fire was meticulously maintained in these temples using the finest wood, and Zoroastrians offered prayers and petitions to Ahura Mazda in ceremonies operated by the Magi. Despite the flourishing of Zoroastrianism in these centuries, it could not withstand the coming of a new religion from Arabia. Zoroastrianism's decline began in earnest with the rise of Islam in the 7th century. In 651 AD, the Sassanid Empire, already weakened by internal strife, fell to the Arab armies of the Rashidun Caliphate. The Arab armies eventually conquered all of Persia and rapidly spread Islam throughout Central Asia. Zoroastrians were initially tolerated under the Islamic laws by receiving a designation as people of the book with Jews and Christians. During the later Umayyad Caliphate, Zoroastrianism still maintained status in Iran by paying the taxes and submitting to the authority of the caliph. However, under the Abbasid Caliphate, Zoroastrians with many other religious minorities faced increasing pressure to convert. Many chose to flee. Some moved to India, where they became known as the Parsis. Others remained in the Persian heartland, holding on to their faith in isolated communities. When the Mongols invaded in the 13th century, the fragile remnant of Zoroastrianism in Persia was thoroughly wiped out. Afterwards, many challenges emerged when Islamic rule was re-established, and persecution and forced conversion became customary under the Shia Islamic Safavid dynasty. As the centuries passed, the number of Zoroastrians dwindled. However, the Zoroastrian faith did not vanish entirely. Small pockets of Zoroastrians managed to survive, particularly in the southern regions of Iran, where they clung to their traditions despite societal pressures and isolation. Today, Zoroastrianism survives as a minority faith with an estimated 200,000 adherents worldwide. Most of these Zoroastrians live in Iran and India, with several diasporas around the world. Zoroastrianism remains vibrant in these places and continues to protect the practices and beliefs that have defined it for millennia. The story of the rise and fall of Zoroastrianism is one of tragedy, but it stands as a testament to the resilience of a faith that has endured the challenges of war and cultural change. The influence of Zoroastrianism can still be seen in various aspects of world religion and philosophy. Its legacy as an influence of other monotheistic faiths and Greek philosophy has received much study and appreciation in the last 2 centuries. The Zoroastrians of today serve as a reminder of the resilience of belief and of the determination of those who remain steadfast in it.